Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, which connects you with the world's top independent management consultants. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm here today with Davis Nguyen, who is the founder of My Consulting Offer. Davis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Will.
And Davis, you find yourself, you're normally based in San Francisco, but you find yourself today where?
I'm in Taipei, Taiwan at the moment.
Yeah, and you were telling me how you ended up there. You were there before the pandemic started and the borders got closed, and just been hanging out for the last 3 months.
Exactly. Decided to stay here, decided to love it. And I was like, well, unexpected 2020, but I am in a foreign country living out the summer as a result.
Yeah, global nomad. So tell me about My Consulting Offer. What does your firm do?
Very simply, My Consulting Offer, we help college students, university students, MBAs, and if you're a student, as well as recent grads, start a career in management consulting. So anyone who wants to work in a Bain, McKinsey, BCG, your audience will know that. We help them get into the management consulting profession.
All right. And so let's maybe take a business school student who's interested in getting into consulting. Perhaps she was in some other field before business school, wants to get into management consulting. When would that person typically, when would you encourage them to start working with you, and what service do you provide? Well, walk us through how you help someone.
Absolutely. So I'll answer the two questions you had, which is what's the ideal time to work with us? And the second, what's that process that we take everyone through? So the ideal time, the joke I like to tell is that it's similar to when you want to dig a well. Ideally, you want to dig a well before you're thirsty and need to drink from it. And so the best time to start is as soon as possible, because we can always take it at an easier pace. But if you give us 3 days, which you actually have done in the past, it gets a little harder. But essentially what we do is we provide two services, very simple. Is we help you get the interview, and then we help you pass the interview. So when it comes to getting the interview, we take MBA students, no matter if you're from a Harvard or if you're going from a University of South Carolina, a Arizona State, what have you. And our team is made up of former McKinsey, Bain, and BCG recruiting managers, partners, and so forth. So we help all of the clients that we work with position themselves to get interviews at the top firms. So no matter if you're targeting a McKinsey or you're targeting an LEK, the whole types of firms, we work with you one-on-one to make sure that your application stands out, make sure that you have the right strategy for networking and everything, and then eventually get you the interview. And then when it comes time to getting the interview, our other half is we have to help you pass the interview. So this is done in two ways. One is that every single person who comes to our program gets mentored by a former manager, principal partner at one of the top firms. So if your dream firm is McKinsey, you get paired off with, for example, a former associate partner or partner at McKinsey who's done interviews, wrote the cases, has like 20 years of experience in interviewing and in the consulting space to work with you to pass the interview, as well as just a curriculum we built to how to teach people how to think like a consultant. So for us, it's not enough to be able to get you the offer, which we do have about an 85% success. Our goal is actually to make you succeed in the job. So my favorite emails I get is not just when McKinsey accepts somebody, but when somebody emails me and says, hey, Davis, I'm up for promotion for EM or I'm up for AP. And it's just one of those happy moments where I'm like, wow, this person actually succeeded in the role, not just get them into the door.
That's amazing. Let's break this down a little bit. So tell me, you mentioned the strategy for networking just to kind of get the interview. Tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So people, when they think about consulting, they think I have to network my way in. If you do a Google search how to get in, people always talk about networking. And for us, the networking strategy is one of the crucial parts of being able to get the interview, depending on what school you're from. So depending on where you are from, so for any listeners, you're probably used to the term target school and non-target school. So target schools are, think about your Harvards, your Yales, your Stanfords, your Whartons, where firms come to you and actually actively seek out consultants. And then you have non-target schools, which are schools where you sometimes send one or two consultants globally a year, but firms aren't knocking at the door. So depending on what school you go, we have a tailored approach for how to actually go through the networking process by leveraging who you know and leveraging people who are yet to know, and basically walk you through the whole process of how do you actually get connected with people at the consulting firms? How do you build a relationship? And how do you eventually get them to want to refer you to the firms? And that's pretty much the step-by-step. It's about how do we build relationships that are actually going to transform your life versus just transactional ones where, all right, well, give me a referral and then I'm done with you.
What are some of those tips to building relationships? So someone who's interested in consulting, how do you suggest that they reach out to people at these firms to actually, build relationships with someone?
Absolutely. I think the way to think about it is there's multiple ways, but I'll share you one of my favorite strategies, which is to find someone with a same common interest as you have. So the reason being is that if someone shares something of your interest, it could be from a school, it could be from a hobby, it could be from a membership affiliation, they're more willing to work with you. So I'll actually share you a story of someone who was in Toastmasters, which is one of my favorite organizations. And so she was an active member of Toastmasters. And even though she went to a school that was, let's say, where consulting firms actually came and visited, the issue was that every single person was emailing every alum that went to that school. And so she was having this issue trying to stand out. So what she ended up doing was, well, I'm in Toastmasters, so let's look up who are members of Toastmasters who happen to work at BCG, who happen to work at Bain, who happen to work at McKinsey. And she ended up making this list, and it was over 60 people that she ended up reaching out to. And she didn't need to reach out to that many, but ended up getting referrals from each of the firms from someone in Toastmasters because they shared that commonality and have been members for years on end. And that was a commonality that most people don't think about, but it doesn't have to be just a formal relationship. It could be simply a hobby. So we've had someone who found someone on LinkedIn and they both connected because they apparently both spent 2 weeks hiking the same trail and happened to have that on their LinkedIn. And that was the commonality they were able to connect on. And I find that those genuine relationships are the best ones because you are able to immediately build rapport with this person when you get on the phone. But also second, you're able to build on a unique relationship that other people don't have access to. And every single person can do this.
So, so you find some common interest, and then what do you suggest to your clients that they do with that? Just reach out on LinkedIn and say, hey, I see we both hiked the trail. I'm interested in BCG. Would you willing to chat with me? Or what do you suggest people do?
Yeah, so the basis of how we have people approach is 4 things. One is, I already mentioned, making a commonality that you reach. Second is to reach out to them in multiple platforms. So LinkedIn might be it, but we actually suggest email and LinkedIn because sometimes people check their LinkedIns, but not their emails and vice versa. So the second is make sure to vary the way that you're reaching out. And third is when it comes to the email, well, you pretty much have it. People overcomplicate it, but it's just sending an email saying, I have this common interest with you, I'd love to talk. But beyond that, it's just being respectful and acknowledging their time. So for the clients that we work with, one of the things that we have them do is show them that you're respectful of their time. So we're very specific, like just ask for 15 minutes if you need 15 minutes. And usually people will give more than 15 minutes, but you want to be very mindful of their time. And then finally, we also make sure that they're super flexible. So for example, most people in our community accept this is that they'll take a call at 5 a.m. their time or at midnight their time if it's convenient for the person they're trying to reach out. But what we found is that when you have a common interest with someone, you're willing to be flexible and you also acknowledge that their time is very precious to them. The hit rate is quite high. And of course, that's just the first part, is being able to connect those. But the goal is to be able to build that relationship over time.
And so you have this call, and what are you trying to achieve with it? I guess I wasn't as aware that it was so important to have someone internal to the firm, like what are you hoping to achieve? That they say, wow, I spoke with this person for 15 minutes. We both walked the Appalachian Trail. I suggest you give them an interview, or, I mean, like, what's the goal of these calls?
So the goal is just to build a relationship out, and you don't need a referral in order to get an interview at these firms, but it does help you be able to get these interviews, especially if you're coming from a school that isn't a Harvard Business School, that isn't an INSEAD, a place where people aren't recruiting actively. And the goal of this relationship is, like any other relationship, is to learn 2 things. It's one, to learn more about the company and if consulting is for you. Because a lot of times our clients actually have these calls and they realize a certain firm isn't for them, or they learn that sometimes consulting isn't for them, and that's totally fine. And if I can help you decide that a certain career path is not the career path for you before you spend the next 3 years in it, that's a victory for me. And the second part is to build a champion within the firm. So no, you're not going to actually, no, we've had one exception where a partner actually was very impressed with a 15-minute call that ended up being a half hour and actually ended up recommending the person. But for most things, the first call is just the one of many to proceed there, to build that relationship, similar to how you would a mentor or a coach.
Okay. And you mentioned also beyond kind of networking, you also help people position themselves well to just get the interview. Tell me a bit about that.
So being able to get the interview comes down to making sure that you represent yourself. So we talked about the networking piece, but a lot of it also goes into, for example, the application, the cover letter, as well as just what type of firms that you are willing to go to. And so for us, we want to be able to help you first find out what firms you want to apply to, because there's over 400 different consulting firms out there, and you know this because your company has over 400 consultants that you work with across all these different firms. And for us, it's finding the right firms that you're going to be happy with and that they're going to help you achieve your professional goals. And then second is making sure that you able to stand out. So because our team is so diverse in different firms and so forth, we're able to know what their hiring targets are, for example. We're able to know what type of personality, what type of skills they're looking for. And third, what is that particular office, for example? The difference between, for example, McKinsey Denver versus McKinsey New York versus McKinsey Singapore. And being able to know those differences helps us be able to help our clients and know the nuances of the office and exactly what the offices are looking for, what type of background, where they stand the best chance. So being able to position yourself there. And of course, when it comes to your resume and cover letter, making sure that you tell a compelling story that represents who you are and the potential and the skill that you bring to these consulting firms.
Okay. Walk me through a typical engagement with a client of yours. So, kind of what sort of, what are the different phases? What types of interactions are they having with my consulting offer over what duration of time?
I'll answer the last question first because that sets context, which is how fast does a person go through our program? So it actually varies depending on it. So even though I don't encourage this, there are people who come to us about a week before deadline or a week before their interviews, and we're able to help them out there. But typically with every engagement, it starts with working with a former recruiter. So for example, I'll take an example, which is, let's say that your dream firm is to work at McKinsey in Singapore, for example. Then what would happen is we would pair you up with, for example, the former head of McKinsey recruiting in Singapore to actually sit with you and talk about, is Singapore and is McKinsey the right choice for you versus, let's say, if you're just interested in Southeast Asia, why not Kuala Lumpur? Why not Manila? Why not Jakarta? And making sure that the firms that you apply to are the right ones for you that are going to be helping you long-term professionally and personally. So that's the first thing that will ever happen. Second is, let's say you make up your mind, like, Davis, I really want to work at McKinsey Singapore. Then that former head of McKinsey Singapore recruiting is going to work with you on your resume. Given that she's gone over hundreds of thousands of resumes over her time at McKinsey, she's able to tell you what McKinsey looks for, what McKinsey isn't looking for, especially with the Singapore office. And that's how we position every single person to have the best chance of being able to break into a particular office, no matter if it's McKinsey Singapore, BCG London, Bain San Francisco, what have you. It's the same idea. And once we are able to help you get those interviews, the second part is being able to pass interviews. And that engagement involves you, as mentioned earlier, getting paired up with a coach. For example, if you're McKinsey Singapore, then you might get paired off with a former McKinsey associate partner, or engagement manager from the McKinsey Singapore office, who will work with you and sit down and actually teach you how to think through the case interviews. For us, it's not about memorizing frameworks. It's not about being able to memorize ways to solve the case. It's not memorizing math formulas. It's about being able how to think like a consultant, how to structure a problem, how to solve it, how to really think about a problem so that this skill is with you for the rest of your life. And so what we do is we break out the case and teach you how to think like a consultant. We teach you how to build a framework. We teach you how to structure thinking. We think about how to do the math, how to do the graphs, how to do the brainstorming and so forth. And when you can put that together, you'll solve the case. The solving the case becomes like a byproduct of learning how to think like a consultant. So every single thing we work with, and traditionally people spend hundreds of hours casing. For our community, we find that we're able to help you master the case in as little as 1 week. As in, do you have to work hard during that week? Yes. But are you able to learn the skills and be able to think like a consultant? Absolutely. And so that's the second part, is just making sure that you can actually think like a consultant and eventually pass both the interview as well as the fit or behavioral interview that follows after that.
And how do you structure that? Is that all one-on-one working, or do you have any kind of recorded video content people work through, or how do you do that case prep?
Good question. So the case prep is done in 3 ways. So first is you get a one-on-one mentor who will sit down with you and have mock interviews with you. So you'll actually get to be given mock interviews as well as feedback on why you would have gotten rejected, what you did well, and how to get there. So you get that one-on-one mentorship and coaching on the case interview. That's the first thing. And second is you get access to our library of case books as well as just material. For example, we have an entire course on case math. So that is broken down into the speed of the math, the accuracy of the math, and the foundation of the math. So if you're struggling with anything, we have an entire curriculum to help you be able to get to the next level and to think like a consultant. So for example, if you're having issues reading graphs and exhibits during the case interview, we have an entire curriculum where we teach you the most common types of graphs that you'll encounter in your job as a consultant, as well as the case interview, and teach you how to actually read each of the graphs, the insights, how to synthesis and provide the answer and the recommendation based on the graphs there. And so we teach you these fundamental skills. So that's the second part. So you have the one-on-one mentor, but you also have these curriculums depending on what skill you're trying to build. And third is we also know that practicing doesn't happen in a vacuum. So we have a community of over 500 people at the moment who are going through the case interview process. And so you could find anyone in the world to practice with who are both also going through the case interview process as a candidate themselves as well.
Talk to me about folks that are currently in jobs who want to transition into consulting. So someone who, whether they're pre-MBA or post-MBA, someone who's a few years out of school, do they have any chance of doing kind of a lateral transfer and joining a top consulting firm? And what does it take to make that transition?
Absolutely. So being out of school, either your MBA or your undergrad or any other degree, completely doable. In fact, about half of the people we work with are what are called experienced hires or industry hires, which is they have years of experience and they're trying to lateral over into consulting. So we can, for example, in the past 2 years, I'll share, you have your traditional background. You have people who are in banking. You have people who are in corporate strategy. You have the people who are in tech. You have people who are in product management and corporate banking and so forth who are trying to go into consulting. But we've had we've had wedding photographers. We've had a musician, and we've had a physical therapist also transition into consulting. And so the background there is a variety of it. But being able to come into consulting as an experienced hire or an industry hire, very, very possible. In fact, there's a trend here where consulting firms are wanting to hire more and more experienced hires because, as you know from your own work here, is that companies are now bidding on projects and consulting firms need that expertise. So they're looking for more and more people with industry experience to come in within a certain vertical or a certain industry to come in and provide their expertise there. So there's a huge movement towards these experienced hires. You don't have to even take my word for it. You can literally go on, let's say, McKinsey's LinkedIn job postings, and you can find that there is a lot, everything from cybersecurity down to mining, down to corporate banking, down to semiconductors. It's just the niches that they're building out on the teams for these consulting firms continues to grow.
What advice do you have for a college student, perhaps in the earlier years, first year, second year, who wants to get into consulting? I'll occasionally get asked these, by some college student who reaches out to me, what should they start doing now to help prepare them to, getting a consulting job?
So when it comes to helping out first years and second year students, love that they're proactive. Is that the good news is that there's a lot that you could do your first and second year that will prepare you to have a better chance at getting into an interview. The first thing I would actually do is just make sure that consulting is actually for you. For example, for most people that we work with, their first or second summers in school, they're not working in consulting. So what they're actually doing is they're exploring other interests. So if it's writing, if it's journalism, if it's politics, if it's tech, if it is finance, whatever it is, they're going through and trying all these other interests, because once you're in consulting, it's quite the grind. If you remember from your own recruiting from McKinsey, is that it takes time to be able to do it. So my first advice is just explore other things and make sure that consulting is actually what you want to do. Talk to consultants, go to info sessions, have other interests, figure out if it's actually the right path for you. The second thing is challenge yourself and take hard classes, especially those analytical classes that really test and prove that you have the intellectual raw horsepower to be able to be a consultant, because it's going to help you later on, but also just sharpen your thinking skills. And third is, if you're starting early, is start attending some of the recruiting events for consulting firms, again, to find out what firms you're actually interested in. So it's not enough to just know that you want to work in consulting, but realize that there are more firms out there than just the big ones you know. So it's more than just Accenture, more than just Deloitte, more than just Bain, McKinsey. There are so many different firms out there. So the earlier that you find out what firms you are interested in and not interested in, the easier it makes so that when you are a third year student, a fourth year student, and you're going into recruiting season, you know exactly what firms you're trying to target, you know why you're targeting them, and you have a game plan for how to get your foot in the door.
What sorts of profiles are consulting firms looking for in terms of like extracurricular activities and so forth? Is there some particular things that get them really excited? Is it important to have a leadership role, or is it okay to just be part of an organization? If you're on the newspaper, do you have to be the newspaper president, or is it okay just be a reporter? Tell me a little bit about the kinds of profiles that really stand out and will help get you an interview.
So this will vary by firm, but as a whole, and this is very similar to, I imagine, your own time here too, Will, is that when recruiters at these firms look at your profile, your resume, your cover letter, your whole application, they're looking at it holistically. So for example, we've had clients who are now at BCG, McKinsey, Bain, who never held a leadership role. They were consulting internships prior, but the things that they did have were these four things. First is they demonstrated that they can actually solve problems. For example, they might have been just a member of the student newspaper, but the beat that they were on was one where you could tell that they did more than just scratch at it, to actually build out the path for themselves, as well as actually take the beat that they're on, what they're writing on, and actually expound on it to the point where they could say, hey, look how many views I had online for my articles compared to the average. Second is they demonstrate leadership skills, but leadership skill doesn't mean that you were president of, let's say, the debate society. If you were able to organize conferences, if you were able to demonstrate that you can lead a team, that counts, even if it's not in a formal title. Third is in consulting, you work in teams. So being able to demonstrate that you're a team player helps you as well. So if I look at your resume or cover letter, or if anyone looks at it and they're like, wow, John is not a team player, there's no evidence that he can actually work with people, that's going to look pretty poorly on you. And then finally is this entrepreneurial drive. And entrepreneurial drive doesn't mean that you have to have started a business or even worked at a startup. It basically means that, are you willing to take an idea and run with it? So do you have this history of being able to start projects and actually finish them? Or are you just someone who has ideas but can't execute on them? Because in consulting, ideas are great, but if you can't put them into action, they're not worth anything. And so those are the four things that holistically firms look for is, can this person do the job? Can they problem solve? Second, do they have leadership potential? Third, can I see them working on this team? And do they have this entrepreneurial drive that would allow them to actually proactively solve problems? Or are they just someone who is going to follow the instructions, but not really take ownership of it?
Okay. And I imagine the same things apply for folks that are, in full-time jobs, the experienced hires.
So the full-time experienced hire is the same, but because you're an experienced hire, there is some nuances. And I'll highlight the two big nuances. The first is that you actually also have to have industry experience at this point of some caliber, right? So it is a little different. If you're applying, for example, a principal role and you've been in the industry for 8 years, then it's seen that you have those industry knowledge. You've spoken at conferences, you've led teams, you've been cited on news, industry papers, and so forth. But if you're just 2 years out of school, it's saying, was this person able to demonstrate these skills? For example, problem solving, were you able to solve a big problem at whatever firm you're currently at? Leadership skills. Even if you weren't a former manager at this company, were you promoted to a role that you can lead the team? Did this company feel like they could put you in a leadership position? Because if this company didn't, why should we take a chance on you? Teamwork, same idea is, what initiatives did you lead? And entrepreneurial drive is, how did you make the company better? Or were you someone who just showed up at 8 a.m., clocked in, and at 4 p.m. clocked out?
Right. How do you describe the differences? Some people ask me, I didn't spend time in them, so I'm not really that sure. How do you explain the differences between McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and other top firms that people are interested in terms of the culture, in terms of the work experience?
Absolutely. So every firm, this is a common question. It's a really good question too. It's every single firm is different. So I'll tell you quick ways to research it, and I'll tell you a firm example of it. which is that when you think about the differences between the different firms, the first thing I like to do is actually just go on Glassdoor and actually be able to read reviews of what people are saying in terms of the employees who are coming into the firms, employees who are leaving the firm. So that's the first thing I think about. The second is actually just talk to people who have recently left the firm or are at the firm. If you did the networking strategy I mentioned earlier on this episode, then you'll know some of the ways to reach out to them. And then the third way to be able to simply reach out is to attend these info sessions, and they'll tell a lot more about the culture. But I'll show you an example here is that if you look at even just the staffing models of these firms, it really dictates the culture of how these firms. So for example, at McKinsey, you have this global staffing model, which basically means that no matter where you are, you're going to be staffed. If you're in the Atlanta office, you can still be staffed to a project in London. If you are in Vietnam, you can still be staffed to a project in Australia. So you're flying all over the world for these projects. Now, as a result, the team that you work on is traditionally from other offices. But if you contrast this with someone, let's say like a Bain, where they do a local staffing model, basically what this means is that the projects themselves and the teams are locally staffed. So if you're in the San Francisco office, you work with the team from San Francisco. So as a result, when you come back to the office on Fridays, everyone on the office at some point you've interacted with or they're your very team. So you have this culture where events are more prevalent. People tend to spend more time together in the office. They know each other. So that's why when you read something like, for example, Glassdoor's best place to work for, people always talk about Bain being one of the best cultures is because it's built into things like the local staffing model. So again, this is just one of the many factors that determines the culture, but just one example of many of how each of the firms differ. And this is before you even talk about the types of projects, the office location, the events, or how old a certain cohort is compared to other firms, because all these factors will determine if you fit into a certain firm's culture or not.
One thing I encourage folks to do, in the independent consulting world, is to build a portfolio of their work, sanitized if necessary. Can you? What's your perspective on that in terms of if you want to get into a consulting firm, putting together either as a student or if you're an experienced hire, putting together a portfolio of things you've done so you can show what you've done and not just talk about it, but actually show rather than tell?
So what you're calling here, we actually recommend that all our clients do is what we call it almost a master resume, which is listing out every single thing that you've done to keep an inventory of it. Because sometimes you did something that you didn't think was very impressive, but when you look at it from a lens of other people, they'll tell you quite differently. So I'll give you an example, which is that we had a client who got offers for both Bain as well as BCG. He was a software engineer. And one of the things that he listed down was that he found that there was a feature that was missing in the product, decided to lead a team on his own time to do it. He just listed it and didn't think much of it because he was like, well, it wasn't in the scope of our product. It was just something I just wanted to do on the weekends. But it turned out to be one of the stories that his interviewers loved, was his entrepreneurial drive. But he wouldn't have had that had he not just had, we call it a brain dump, where you dump everything that you've known and done into one master sheet. But the earlier you start this sheet, the easier it becomes. No matter if you're a first-year student in college or if you just started your first job and you're looking to transition to consulting or any other role, it's just a best practice I recommend in general, just keeping track of the things that you've done, because you never know when you'll, one, forget it, or two, will find that it's actually quite an impressive feat that you should bring back.
Talk to me about some of the other marketing collateral, if you will. So LinkedIn profile, resume, social media. What are some of your suggestions for these other aspects of what you could kind of think about as your marketing collateral? Do you work with folks on kind of refining and upgrading like their LinkedIn profile, their resume, et cetera? Any tips on those?
Yeah, so when it comes to the marketing collateral, the application part, so we actually don't focus on the LinkedIn and the social media, besides cleaning it and making sure that there's nothing there that's going to haunt you. But mainly when firms are looking at your application, at least for now in 2020, but they're just looking at two things, which is your resume and your cover letter. So actually, we think the most impressive piece of collateral you can have is your cover letter, because most people just think that the cover letter is a sheet of paper that I'm just going to regurgitate my resume. But really, what we try to do with people when they come to us is we try to tell a story on their cover letter and think about what do you wish that the recruiter or the person in HR knew about you that doesn't stand out in your resume? And you'd be amazed that so many people we work with who were, let's say, out of school or they were a second year MBA student, they had applied the year prior or 2 years prior and so forth to these consulting firms, and they didn't get any interviews. So we had a story of a guy named John who applied for 23 different consulting firms, and he got rejected by 22 of them. And then he came to us, and one of the things that we fixed was we fixed his resume, but everything we fixed was his cover letter. And then a year later, the same job, he was working in a boutique tax firm. He submitted the improved resume, but really the improved cover letter. And all of a sudden, he got 22 out of 23 of those firms to actually this time give him a chance and give him an interview. And the biggest piece of the change was making sure that his story was told on the cover letter, which there were so many facets about his life and about what he's able to bring to these consulting firms that just didn't stand out because you can't naturally put it into a bullet point on LinkedIn or a bullet point on his resume in this case.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that cover letters were so important. I guess particularly for sort of on-campus hiring, if you're going to a target school for on-campus hiring, I didn't realize that cover letters were that important, that they're pretty much just, looking at resume books, but maybe that applies more if you're at a non-target school or if you're an experienced hire.
So this applies to all three, and we emphasize this for all of them because it's an important piece of real estate that you're given as opportunity to use, and if you don't take advantage of it, someone else will.
All right, and what makes it for a really good cover letter?
So the things that make a really good cover letter are a couple of things. Like we emphasize many, but I'll focus on the three biggest areas here. One is actually taking the time to think, what on my cover letter can I include content-wise that they wouldn't get on my resume? Because if they can see it on your resume, you're just wasting real estate by having it on your cover letter. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we emphasize when it comes to the cover letter is really digging into the why would you be an asset to the consulting firm? So a lot of people, when they look at the cover letter, like, let me talk about me. But really the approach that we take is quite the opposite. And we think, no, don't talk about yourself. Talk about how can the firms benefit from having you? So think about it from their lens. As in, it's similar to when you hire or anyone hires, is people like to think it's all about me, but really it's about what can I provide to my employer, in this case, the consulting firm. So the second thing we think about is how do you actually communicate the values of the consulting firm? So one thing that we have people do is actually go on the firm's website, look at their values, and demonstrate how you can actually share those values. And the third thing that we have people use the cover letter to is to explain any extraordinary circumstances that they might not be able to explain in their resume. So for example, we had a client who's at McKinsey now who actually had a 3-year break in her resume where she had a medical illness and it just took her out. But she was able to explain all the things that she was able to do during that time period that you just wouldn't have seen on the resume. And the head of the regional McKinsey recruiting was so impressed with her story that just instantly gave her an interview from that point. Eventually she would go on and get her offer. But had she applied with just her resume, which she did the year prior, she didn't get any traction because people didn't understand her story and why there was this random 3-year gap in her resume.
Is it a place to do a little name dropping in terms of if you have been doing some networking and saying, well, and speaking to so and so, the head of your XYZ practice, this really impressed me, and this seemed like something that got me, that I could help on. Should you kind of do some of that stuff to sort of demonstrate in your cover letter that you have connections into the firm and you've been having discussions?
You can, and it really depends on the circumstances, but really this comes up to two things. Is that one is typically when people work with us, if they're going to name drop someone on their cover letter, then traditionally they should also have a referral by this point from that person. So it usually more powerful and it gets attached onto the application. That's the first. And then the second thing that is that unless that person is very influential about why you're applying to that firm or to that position, name dropping doesn't really do much for you. As in, for us, it's a case by case basis. But in general, if you were to mention someone on the cover letter by name and it doesn't quite add value to why this firm, then why mention it at all when you can use it to talk about how you can actually help the firm with their goals?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, there are other firms out there, other organizations that are helping people, get jobs at top consulting firms. Tell me a little bit about what led you to start My Consulting Offer and and how you how you differentiated from other firms that are doing something similar.
So so two answers, two questions there. It's like our origin story, and then ultimately what makes us different. So for our origin story, the short answer is that when I was working at Bain, I loved my time at Bain. But how I actually got to Bain was I didn't decide until my senior year of university when there was about 2 weeks left before the resume drop, and it was essentially we had 2 weeks, and I decided to go into consulting last minute. I didn't know what a resume was, didn't know what a cover letter was, didn't even know what a case interview was. And so I had 2 weeks to prepare, but I eventually figured out the method. I thought, well, okay, if I could do this, other people can. So I worked at Bain, worked on the recruiting team. And eventually, though, I would leave Bain to go work at an education startup, still in California. But because we were a startup, I took a pay cut. Because we were in education, I took a bigger pay cut. And because we just were starting and we're trying to figure out our product market fit, we didn't make money for the first couple. And part of my compensation was, well, we need to make profits, Davis, for you to get part of it. So X% of zero profits is still zero. If anything, I should have owed them money. Every month we were still losing money. And to make ends meet at the time, one of my family members had a $20,000 medical bill that I needed to get paid off. And so I didn't have the money at the time. And I thought, well, what can I do? And the idea came because a bunch of people just came and reached out online and said, hey, Davis, I'd love for you to help me get into consulting. And so I just started doing this on the weekends a couple of years ago. And this was back in 2016, 2017. And I just started working on people's resumes, cover letters, doing some of the case interviews, doing the mock cases and so forth. And just figuring out how can we help them prepare for these interviews and help them get these interviews. And in the beginning, we had a 100% success rate. I was like, oh, wow, this is a great seasonal work for just a couple months out of the year. And eventually referrals led to more referrals. And eventually what started with me in my living room just grew out to a team of over 40 of us who are now working to help people go into consulting. So that's the origin story. It just started with a $20,000 medical bill that I needed to pay off. And in terms of what's made us different is I would say it comes down to three things, which is that one is for us, we really care about results. So if you go on our website, you'll see we publicly share and update our success rate. So right now it's like 85%. And we actually share testimonial videos. So not just quotes or pictures and so forth, right? You literally could click a video and someone talks about their experience for 2-3 minutes. You can click on their LinkedIn and actually see that they work at these firms. And if they went to your school, you can actually reach out to them and actually talk to them about their experience working with my consulting offer. So that's the first thing, is that we're not ashamed of our results. We're really proud of our results. That's the first. The second is the way that our team is comprised. Just because you were a former partner at McKinsey, for example, doesn't mean that you're guaranteed a spot on our team to be a mentor. So every single person on the team goes through a 20-hour interview process just to make it. So for example, in the last 6 months, we've had about 210 people apply to be a coach and a mentor on our team. We only took 6 out of those bunch to be able to add to the team out of that cohort. So people are not only at the top of their firms, but they're at the top of these 2.5% of mentors and coaches. So that's the second thing that we do. And the third is we just stay very up to date on the industry. So we have people on our advisory board who are currently at the McKinseys, the Bains, and the BCGs, and all these firms who are telling us about how their hiring practices are changing. So we're ahead of the industry every single time in terms of what firms are looking for.
What's the perspective of the consulting firms on the service you offer? Do they feel that you're helping people kind of like hack the system, or do they say no? Do you get the sense that they say no? They're helping non-traditional applicants prepare for our thing, and that's a good thing. How do you think the consulting firms feel?
So far, it's been very positive about how they think about where we fit into the larger scheme. So we still have partners from McKinsey, Bain, BCG reach out to us and praises privately or publicly, and so it's been a pretty good experience in terms of it as well. As in, I imagine one day if we were sending them bad candidates, that they would say something. But again, like our goal is not to change you to get the offer. That's like a byproduct for us. It's how can we change you to think like a consultant? And how do you get that mindset into you? And as a result, the people we go in get promoted, they become advocators, they go into recruiting, they take other active roles within the firm. And so far, it's been a pretty good positive result from our alums.
And do you have any kind of admission requirements for your clients? I mean, if you would, agree to work with people that basically have very little chance of getting into a top firm, that's not going to be great for your success rate. So how tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you caught one of our secrets is that we don't take every single person. So in fact, when people work with us, they actually have to go through a screening process. We actually only take about 30% of the people who reach out to us. So out of every 10 people who apply to work with us, we only take about 3. And so that's part of it is that they go through a screening process. And so there's 2 parts. Like one is a really in-depth questionnaire to make sure that you are someone we can actually help. So we'll help you if we think that there's at least a 1% chance that you're willing to go with us. But if you have a 0% chance, we're just going to turn you away and just say, hey, we don't want to sell you something that we can't fulfill. Like there's no pipe dream here.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your pricing structure?
Yeah, so the pricing structure is very unique to every single individual. So obviously some people who need more help, the pricing range will differ. But for us, we do what's called a risk sharing model, which is that we really believe in our product and our program and our service is that the majority of the profits that we see don't happen until you actually get the offer. So we're in it with you.
That's amazing. Where can people go online to find out more about it, and if they're interested to get some help applying to a top firm?
Absolutely. You can learn more about us, what we do, our process, why we believe in this risk sharing by simply going to myconsultingoffer.org or just emailing me at davis@myconsultingoffer.org.
Fantastic. Well, Davis, thank you so much. Fascinating what your firm is doing. And by the way, congratulations on being named one of the power players of consulting by Business Insider.
Hey, I'm honored to be on any list you are, Will.
All right. Davis, hey, thanks a lot for joining.
Honored to be here.